Hello and welcome to episode number 53 of Behind the Impact. I'm your host, Jeremy Brown. In this episode, Darlene Goins, the president of the Wells Fargo Foundation and the head of Philanthropy and Community Impact at Wells Fargo, joins the show. Darlene, welcome to Behind the Impact.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
When I look at your career, I feel like you've been there, done that twice over. You have seen a lot, you have done a lot, which is why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and to really dig into your background and to get your thoughts on really corporate impact as a field in general. But before we dig into that, what I would really like to do is kind of take a trip down memory lane, go back in time, and learn more about how you got into social impact. Where did it all start for you?
Sure. So you probably look at my background and see engineering degrees from Stanford and think, how in the world did she end up in social impact? But I'd say part of it was my personal journey. So I'm the daughter of a United Methodist minister. Service to others has always been instilled in me since that childhood. And I got to witness my father in service to others, my mother in service to others. And so that's always been, I'd say, a through line for me through college and through during different aspects of my career. But I've also been very analytically and mathematically inclined. And so that led me down the path of engineering and decision science. And I've been fascinated by how people make different decisions, how they can use data to make better decisions. I'd say early in my career, that was more focused on business decisions for various companies, corporations, how they could make data driven decisions. But then about 12 or 13 years ago, while I was at FICO the second time, I was in the scores division, and one of the executives came to me and said, there's a lot of consumer confusion around FICO scores. There were these educational scores that could give you an incorrect view of your credit rating. Can you think about how we can demystify those for consumers? And I had always been on the business side of things. So this foray into consumer education was new to me, but I created a program called FICO Score Open Access through which financial institutions could share FICO scores for free with their customers, along with different credit information and education that could help them really chart their financial futures. And that awoke in me this passion around economic empowerment and really tied back to that service of others. And I saw the power of putting data in the hands of consumers and how we could help them make better data driven decisions. And so that led me to Wells Fargo, where I thought Wells Fargo is so large, national bank. And with our size and our scale and our resources and relationships, I could have an even bigger impact on consumers. So came here to lead financial education and then financial health philanthropy. Spent a little bit of time in the business, in the consumer bank, leading the Banking Inclusion Initiative, really focusing on unbanked and underbanked individuals and helping them get access to the financial system. And then a little over 2 years ago, had an opportunity to come back over to public affairs and lead philanthropy and community impact. So, and bringing with me a renewed business mindset, I would say, to the work, which is a little bit different and maybe unique in terms of the folks that come into corporate philanthropy.
Talk a little bit more about the business mindset, because I think that's an important point to really kind of dig into a little bit more, because that is the conversation I've been having with a lot of practitioners, especially this year, is this idea of moving away from just being perceived as program managers and into more strategic kind of operator roles and really understanding, yes, the impact side of things, but also the business side of things. So can you talk a little bit more about that business mindset and why that was so important for you?
Sure. So just looking back at my career at FICO, before I left FICO, I was running the whole B2B scores business for the Americas. So I've had that business mindset. I had, P&L responsibilities. And so this shift into philanthropy was quite different for me. Because I had that business mindset, I look at our philanthropic investments just as that. And I run the team and the function as if it were a business, right? Wells Fargo entrusts in us a significant amount of funding that we can deploy in communities. So, how can we leverage our philanthropic giving in a way that not only drives positive community outcomes, but also helps support our business growth objectives? And that requires me to lean on my business acumen, make sure I understand the business objectives of the different lines of business, that I engage with the business leaders, understand which markets are of strategic importance so that maybe we concentrate more of our philanthropic giving in those markets. There are ways to leverage this function so that it's doing good in the community, but also doing good for the business.
And so for the practitioners out there listening to this episode and really are at a point in their careers where they're trying to figure out how to do exactly that. Like how do I become more strategic? How do I understand how the business operates so I can then evolve my role and become more durable within my company? What advice would you give those practitioners when it comes to kind of building that business acumen?
Definitely spend time with business leaders. I regularly meet with different leaders within our four lines of business. Sometimes it's the CEOs, sometimes it's their direct reports, but I'm constantly trying to keep a pulse on what their strategic priorities are, what their growth objectives are, what markets are of most importance to them. And then I look at ways that we can direct our investments, where some of them may be non foundation investments, so separate from the foundation entity, but corporate giving, where we can be very well integrated with the business in terms of how we make our investments. And then others where it's foundation giving, where we can't get tangible benefits, we need to think about that a little bit differently. But I think it's having the conversations, listening, looking at data, figuring out how that can inform your decisions. I think about some examples right here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, the Mercy Housing California Sunnydale development, where our line of business, our community lending and investment team, provided the financing for the housing development. And through the New Markets Tax Credit Program, they provided the financing for the community hub. And then we were able to take our philanthropy and layer that on and provide a grant to Mercy Housing to seed an endowment that would provide resident services, which then increases the likelihood of success for the residents. So really being in tune with what's going on with the business, what are their priorities, how are they using their financing, and then figuring out how we can layer on our philanthropy to have even greater impact in communities.
I can imagine a practitioner listening to this and, thinking to themselves, this is a lot. I'm not accustomed to thinking with a business lens. Maybe I came from the nonprofit world, and obviously that's a different kind of beast of its own. I'm not used to understanding OKRs and, connecting
Mhm.
my work to business objectives. Where should practitioners start when it comes to thinking that way and really approaching their work with a more kind of business lens or through more of a business lens?
So, I mean, one easy thing, if it's a public company, and there are quarterly earnings call, like listen to the earnings calls, read the annual report, read the CEO's annual letter to shareholders. Like you can learn a lot about the direction the business is going just by tapping into those readily available resources. So that's one. But then I think also making sure that you seek out leaders within the organization that can be your like advocacy team almost, where maybe they have an affinity for the work, but they can also provide you with those insights into the business so that you can figure out the best ways to leverage corporate philanthropy more as a strategic asset and not just as generosity to communities.
Let's talk more about the Wells Fargo Foundation. Can you walk me through kind of what the structure looks like today in terms of who's on the team, kind of the focus and the mission of the foundation?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit broader than the foundation, philanthropy and community impact, which includes management of the foundation legal entity, but also all of our corporate giving that comes directly from Wells Fargo. So we develop strategic initiatives and nonprofit collaborations that really drive positive impact in communities across the U.S. and around the world. Really focusing on where our employees are located and markets where we have a presence. In terms of our mission, we know that thriving communities help fuel a strong economy. And so we are focused on helping communities thrive with financially resilient families, vibrant businesses, and affordable places to call home. And we typically will give somewhere between 200 and $300 million away annually in communities. And we focus on three main priorities: housing access and affordability, business growth, and financial opportunity, because those priorities align to our business. So it enables us to do things like layer our corporate giving alongside line of business financing for deeper impact. It enables us to tap into the expertise of our employees through volunteerism. In fact, our employees volunteered over 900,000 hours last year. So we look at how we can leverage all of the resources of Wells Fargo. And to do that, I have a team of about 100 folks, a little over 100 folks in the US, India, and the Philippines. And we have a leadership team that has focus area leaders for each of those three focus areas, as well as a leader for specialized programs. So think programs that are focused on veterans or people with disabilities or rural communities. And then a community relations team that is across the country, as well as we've got folks in India and the Philippines as well. They are looking at the local community needs and the local connections with the local business leaders and providing philanthropic investments at that level. My team also leads all of our employee volunteerism and giving. And then we also lead our philanthropic response to disasters. And as you can imagine, with the size of our work and the scope of our work, we have an extensive operations, finance, and insights team that handles more of the administrative aspects for such a large operation.
And Wells Fargo is a large organization. Obviously, you mentioned that you have 100 folks on your team. When it
Mhm.
comes to employee volunteerism, how does your team go about kind of rallying employees across the US to and really across the world to get involved?
Sure. So we have what we call employee impact teams, and we have those in all of the major markets where we have a large employee presence. And those employee impact teams, they set up activities in our community care portal. That's where all of our employees can go to find out how they can volunteer or they can donate or earn community care grants, which I'll talk about in a second. But these employee impact teams are great because they'll look at local community opportunities, local community needs. We provide funding to them, they create activities, and then our employees can go and sign up. We also provide all of our employees with 16 hours of paid volunteer time each year. So they can take advantage of that and volunteer in the community. And then I mentioned community care grants. So it's sort of like a matching program, but a few years ago, we moved away from doing a pure matching program to something that rewards both doers and givers. We want it to be more equitable because not everyone may be able to donate a lot of money, of their own personal money, to an organization to get a match, but they might be able to volunteer their time. And so we reward our employees when they record volunteer hours. They can earn community care grants that they can then direct to the causes that they care most about.
And is Wells Fargo engaging in just traditional volunteering or skills-based volunteering or a combination of both?
A combination of both. One of our great programs is Skills for Impact, so it's skills-based volunteerism. And we really position it as not only an opportunity for employees to leverage their expertise to support nonprofits, but it's also a professional development opportunity. So we work really closely with our human resources team to identify where there might be opportunities for stretch assignments. We work with our interns, with our analysts that come in the summer, and we do skills-based projects with them. So it's really a great opportunity that has sort of double duty in terms of the support for communities and support for our employees.
And you mentioned you work with your HR team.
Yes. hmm
How often are you collaborating with other kind of departments within Wells Fargo? And the reason I ask this question is because that seems to be kind of in terms of a trend on the upswing, in terms of practitioners really trying to collaborate with internal teams to really kind of bolster in a way their presence within their companies and to increase their own influence as well.
I couldn't agree more. We definitely have, I'd say, increased our connectivity with other parts of the organization over the past couple years. Human resource is that's a great example. Even when we think about our employee hardship fund that we manage, our We Care Fund, we've been working really closely with our human resources life events team and with our employee counseling team so that we can provide holistic support for our employees. I mentioned the lines of business. We are very connected in with the lines of business. In fact, we do things like hold either monthly or quarterly calls around a specific focus area across the company. So, for example, with housing, we have an affordable housing monthly call where we invite folks that are all across the company that are touching affordable housing. So it might be folks in our commercial real estate team, our community lending and investment. It might be people in the home lending team, the public finance team. We all get together so that we can have a good understanding of the different work that different teams are doing and how we might be able to leverage the skills and resources of the different teams together for deeper impact.
And based on what you have seen work internally in terms of that cross-functional collaboration, what advice would you give a practitioner that is looking to do the same thing? They're looking to maybe collaborate with HR or collaborate with marketing or even their product team.
So one thing that I introduced when I came over to lead the team, so we have a foundation board that provides governance and oversight for our foundation giving at a certain level. And we also, that same body serves as an advisory forum for our non-foundation giving. And that group is comprised of leaders in the different lines of business and different enterprise function areas. And so having that connectivity and awareness of our work really helps. But one thing that I've done is I've aligned each person on our board or advisory forum with a different leader on my team. And so that connectivity, they then meet in between our quarterly meetings. They meet separately and can talk about the different strategies for the different groups and how we can pull them together. Having that connectivity has really made a huge difference. One of our board members is our head of HR. And so I paired her with our leader that manages our employee volunteerism and giving. And so just having that deeper connectivity and understanding of the work and the opportunity has led to things like taking our entire intern program and analysts through the Skills for Impact over the summer, right? That didn't exist before we had that connectivity. And so I think looking for ways to get closer to the different leaders in the different functional areas really makes a difference.
The foundation's advisory board. In terms of who's on the board, did you approach it from a strategic perspective and in terms of we want certain leaders within Wells Fargo to be on the board, or was there any other thinking behind the makeup of the board?
Yes, definitely strategic decision in terms of who's on the board. And so we looked at who are key line of business leaders and enterprise function leaders that touch our work. So, for example, we do a lot of work with the commercial bank with certain sectors. And so we have um, one of the leaders from the commercial bank that manages that portfolio is on our board. So I think it's really important for practitioners to really think strategically around who they want at that table, because not only does it help in terms of creating awareness about your work and the value of the work, but it creates advocates within the different lines of business that can help tell our story and help describe the business value that we are providing. So the other thing is whenever I'm hiring someone from my leadership team for my leadership team, I think strategically in terms of who I want on the panel. So for the interview. So for example, I recently hired a new head of housing access and affordability philanthropy. I made sure that I had someone from the community lending and investment team on her interview panel. I had someone from home lending on the interview panel because the people that are in the lines of business that this person is going to need to engage with, I want them to have like some skin in the game in terms of who's sitting in that seat. And that's already creating relationships for her when she walks in the door.
I love how you approach putting together boards, and I feel like in terms of creating internal advocates or champions, it seems to me that's a really beneficial way of going about doing that. Of having a, but whether you have a foundation or not, if you're a practitioner, you can create a small advisory board and have those champions plugged into the work that you're doing and have them give feedback and participate. That helps build up that kind of champion arm, if you will. And then you have advocates throughout the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then when we're out in the community with different activations, it's great to include them as spokespeople. So, yeah, I think it just creates a lot of opportunity.
One thing that I want to really dig into is the Open Business Fund. Tell me more about that program.
Sure. So, the Open for Business Fund was created during the pandemic. We took the gross processing fees that we received from the government for the PPP. Um, and we put it towards this fund, $420 million, to deploy capital and resources into communities. We saw during the pandemic that a lot of businesses were struggling to just stay afloat, to maintain payroll, to keep preserve jobs. And so we quickly deployed a good portion of that out to community development financial institutions that could provide access to capital for businesses and help them stay open. But also, we saw that during the pandemic, a lot of businesses needed to pivot because we had shutdowns and they weren't able to stay open. Think about restaurants or hair salons, things like that. And so they needed to be able to pivot their businesses and they needed technical assistance to do so. And so we also carved out a big portion of the Open for Business Fund to provide that technical assistance to the businesses and communities so that they could make whatever adjustments to help with their sustainability. But then we also learned that businesses really needed capital to be able to acquire assets, things like equipment, buildings. And so the last portion of the Open for Business Fund, we really dedicated to asset acquisition. And that was a real learning for us. And so we've done more work in that since the Open for Business Fund, which was able to serve over 336,000 businesses and create or preserve 460,000 jobs. We learned, and so we had another program that we announced last year, the Open for Business Growth Program. That was a $20 million program where it was really focused on growth ready businesses and helping them scale. And oftentimes that meant um, acquiring assets. So that was one of those learnings that we took from the original Open for Business Fund, carried it forward, and looked at businesses that were maybe at $100,000 of revenue each year. But how do we help them scale to $1 million? And that might mean different financial products that need to be offered, or different ways for them to be able to acquire assets. But we took those learnings from the original fund and took it into that next program.
So it's clear that you're no stranger to launching and scaling programs. Obviously, you have programs at Wells Fargo, you had programs at FICO. In terms of creating a robust program that makes an impact in the community, but also does provide business value, what does that type of program look like?
Again, I go back to kind of the same types of things that I mentioned earlier, right? First, it starts with listening. So listening to both community and to the business and figuring out where there are intersection points, so that when you create your strategy, you're looking at how you can drive dual outcomes, right? The business value as well as the community impact. One of the things that we're doing even more this year, is investing alongside our clients. So I gave the Sunnydale example earlier. We have other examples like Breaking Ground in New York, but how can we invest alongside our clients for deeper impact? So then not only are we deepening the impact that we're having in communities, but we're also deepening our relationship with our clients. So listening, understanding, and then looking at those intersection points between the two in how you structure a new strategic initiative.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about your career. We talked about some stuff that you have going on at Wells Fargo. So what I would like to do now, take a step back and really look at the entire kind of corporate impact landscape as it is today. I would really love to learn more about the lessons you've learned when it comes to scaling a corporate foundation.
I think, again, listening. So listening to community, listening to your stakeholders, listening to the business, is number one. And co-creating with community and with the business, um, generally will lead to greater success. I think leveraging data, um, to lead to these data-driven decisions that I talked about early in my career. I'm still constantly looking at data. I was just meeting with our insights team earlier today, looking at the latest dashboards. Um, and then I think, establishing metrics for success early, understanding your key performance indicators or your OKRs, and then finding the right partners internally and externally, because like we discussed, right? You're going to need those internal advocates that are going to help tell your story internally around the business value you're creating. But you also have to have the right external partners that are going to be able to execute on the philanthropic investments that you're making and drive the outcomes that are measurable, that you can roll up across all of your grant making and tell a comprehensive story.
You mentioned data, and obviously this is going to be different for every company. Every company has their own data that they care about. What data do you look at?
So, in terms of the community outcomes, we have a standard set of metrics across our different focus areas. So, for housing, it might be number of housing units created or rehabilitated. It might be number of households that received housing counseling for home ownership, right? So we have some standard metrics within each focus area. For financial opportunity, it might be the number of people who increase savings by, X number of dollars, or the number of people who increase their credit score. In business growth, it might be the number of businesses served, the number of jobs created or preserved, the number of businesses who significantly increased their revenue. So we look at what are the standard metrics that we want to be able to report out across all of our grantees. And then we roll that up in our dashboard. So I can see the number of grants, the dollar amount, and projected impact across those standard metrics. And then from a enterprise function perspective, every year, as we continue to evolve our strategy and look at the overall objectives for the company and how we can support those, we set, a number of KPIs and targets. We look at baselines. So it may be, we've been on a journey of getting more and more focused with fewer but larger grants. So from an operational perspective, we have metrics around that. We're tracking, are we decreasing the number of grants? Are we increasing our median grant size? We look at communications metrics. So are we really getting our story out there? What's the sentiment around the story? We look at metrics aligned to our strategy. Are we spending the majority of our funding in our focus areas? Or are other causes creeping in that are still important for communities, but not our focus? So we're constantly measuring, and it's great that I've got this amazing insights and analytics team that's created these dashboards. So I'm constantly, again, I'm a data geek, so I'm constantly looking at the data.
So it sounds like when it comes to the metrics that you look at and care about, it feels like you're kind of working backwards, meaning you start with the business goals, objectives, OKRs, things like that, and then what can we as a foundation do to not only obviously make an impact in the community, but also ladder up to those key business objectives to help the business grow as well.
Exactly.
How important is that? And the reason I ask this question is because I'm trying to get practitioners to understand the importance of not just tracking things like volunteer hours, but going a layer deeper.
Mm-hmm.
How are the volunteering hours impacting our business?
It's very important, especially I think in today's environment. And there are a lot of changes, disruptors happening, right? We think about AI and what that's going to mean. So I think being able to tie to the business objectives is more important now than ever. And so I think you have to start there. You really do have to start there.
Now, if you had to predict where corporate philanthropy is going to be in the next, let's say, 7 years, what would your prediction be?
I definitely think that connectivity to the business value, it will continue to be more important than ever. And um, I'd love to see corporate philanthropy thought of not as something that you have to do, but something that is really good for business. It's not a cost of doing business, but really good for doing business. And so I'd love to see that in, you know, 7 years. Um, I do think that in order to have impact, we're going to have sustained investment, which also probably means that organizations will continue to get more focused in terms of their giving. And, there's a lot of nonprofits out there. And I think there is an opportunity for nonprofits to do more coalition building, collaborating, maybe mergers and acquisitions, because we're getting more focused because we need to be able to drive not only community outcomes, but also business value. And we can't just spread the money around like peanut butter. It's not going to drive transformative change. That's just going to be incremental change. And I just don't think that's the way forward.
Let's end with this.
Mhm.
If you could eliminate one belief or habit that is keeping or holding corporate impact back from becoming a core business discipline, what would that belief or habit be?
I would say the corporate philanthropy function needs to not just think of themselves as the social impact folks, right? I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to aligning with the business. If you don't do that, um, it's going to be a tough road ahead, I think.
I've been beating that drum for well over a year, so I'm really glad to hear that from you, Darlene. Darlene, thank you so much for joining me and for all of your leadership in this space. I mean, in just a short period of time, I already learned a lot from you, and I know a lot of practitioners will too. So thank you so much for kind of pulling back the curtain, if you will, in terms of what Wells Fargo has going on and really walking us through your career and really sharing your experience with me.
Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
This episode is brought to you by Social Impact World, the intelligence layer for corporate impact. To learn more, go to socialimpactworld.com. I'm Jeremy Brown. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Behind the Impact.